The Threnody Institute of Strategic Command had trained officers for the Kesarine Compact for 181 years. It sat in high orbit over Kesarine Prime, a slow ring of habitat modules and drilled decks that had watched 14 wars end and had begun preparing officers for the 15th before the ink dried on the last treaty. Its graduation rate was 58% and had held at 58% within half a point for 6 consecutive decades. A number repeated so often in the Institute's recruitment materials that incoming cadets recited it back like scripture before they understood what it cost. In 24 years of accepting human applicants under the Compact's Mutual Defense Charter, the Institute had graduated 14. The current second-year class had 1. Alumni of the Institute held command positions across 9 active fleets and 11 planetary defense authorities. The library on Deck 7 contained the personnel files of every graduate for a century and a half, cross-referenced by campaign, by species, by outcome. New cadets were required to read a minimum of 40 files before their first semester began, so that they understood, in specific terms, what the Institute considered success. Success was rarely dramatic in those files. Success was usually a supply line that held, a flank that did not collapse, a retreat conducted in good order. The Institute did not train heroes. It trained people who kept other people alive under conditions engineered to make that difficult. This was the context into which Cale Osric arrived, 11 days before the start of term, carrying 1 bag and a knife that had no place in a cadet's inventory manifest and was allowed anyway, because the admissions board could not agree on which regulation would have required them to take it from him. He was 19. He was from Ashford Reach, a mining colony on the trailing edge of a system the Compact's charts listed as low priority, low population, low strategic value. His admissions file was 412 pages, which was unusual. Most cadet files ran under 50, and Commandant Soren Vey, who would later teach his command theory seminar, had read it in full 3 times before term began, because the first 2 readings had produced conclusions that did not fit inside anything the Institute normally processed. The file said that Ashford Reach had been cut off from Compact supply lines for 3 years during a raider incursion that Regional Command had, at the time, classified as low intensity and deprioritized for relief. It said that during those 3 years, the colony had not fallen. It said that the person who had organized its defense, coordinated its rationing, planned its evacuations of outlying settlements, and directed 41 recorded engagements against raider elements, had been 16 years old when the first attack came and had held no formal rank, no military training, and no title beyond the one the colony had given him informally, which the file rendered without embellishment. As the one people asked, the verification had taken the admissions board 11 weeks. Colony testimony was cross-checked against salvaged sensor logs, against raider wreckage recovered by a Compact patrol 2 years after the fact, against the survivor manifests of settlements that should not have had survivor manifests at all. Every number came back confirmed. 40,000 colonists had been on Ashford Reach when the incursion began. 38,900 were alive when the Compact finally arrived. Cale had not mentioned any of this in his application essay, which was 6 lines long and described, in flat administrative language, his reasons for wanting a formal commission. To do correctly with training what I did without it. He arrived at the Institute the way most cadets did not. He found his quarters. He unpacked 1 bag. He reported to orientation on time and sat in the back row. And when his name was called, he said, "Here," and nothing else. And by the end of the first week, most of his cohort had absorbed the general impression that he was quiet, unremarkable, and probably going to wash out by midterm the way most of the 14 previous humans' unlucky predecessors, the ones who never made it to graduation at all, had washed out before him. Commandant Vey did not correct this impression. He had decided by the end of orientation week that the impression was going to do useful work on its own. The social architecture of a cadet class at Threnody assembled itself within the first month, the way it did every year, along lines that had nothing to do with the Institute's official hierarchy, and everything to do with species, rank of origin, and the particular currency of respect that circulated among people who had all, in one way or another, already proven something before they arrived. At the top of second-year Cohort 7 sat Cadet Viral Kess, a Threxian in her 4th year of the 6-year program, Ranked first in her class by a margin the tactics faculty described as structural, meaning it was not going to close. Threxians organized socially the way their exoskeletal biology organized physically, in layered, load-bearing hierarchies, where every member's position was legible to every other member at a glance, and where questions about that position were not insults. They were simply how the structure got tested. The challenge came on a Thursday in the mess hall during the 20 minutes between the tactics seminar and the physical evaluation block, when attendance was high and attention was loose. Viral Kess asked it the way certain cadets asked questions of that kind, which is to say, with the timing and tone of someone who had prepared it. Osric. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 4 tables had already gone quiet in the particular way that tables go quiet when they sense material is coming. The compact accepted its first human cadets 19 years ago. 14 have graduated in that time, across an entire coalition of member worlds that have been fighting frontier wars for longer than your species has had unified spaceflight. She let that sit. I'm curious how many actual combat engagements you've commanded. Not simulations, not drills, how many exactly? Several cadets smiled. It was a specific category of smile, the kind that happens in rooms where a hierarchy is already agreed upon, and someone is simply being asked to confirm it out loud. It was not cruel, exactly. None of them believed they were being cruel. They believed they were asking a reasonable question of someone who had, by every visible signal available to them, not yet earned the right to be offended by it. At the head of the mess table, Commandant Vey said nothing. He had pulled Kale's colony engagement logs in the second week of term, cross-referenced them against fleet archive footage recovered from the same patrol that had verified the admissions file, and had been waiting since then for the right room to ask the right question. He did not know it would be this exact question. He had known it would be close. "That's a reasonable question," Kale said, in the tone of someone who genuinely found it reasonable, which unsettled the 2 cadets nearest him more than sarcasm would have. He set down his tray. "Do you want the number that's in the compact's official incident log, or the total?" Viral's antennae flattened slightly, a Threxian gesture the tactics faculty had, in a lecture Kale had attended in week 3, translated roughly as recalculating. "There's a difference." The compact only started logging incidents on Ashford Reach after the 3rd year, once a patrol confirmed the colony existed and was still populated. Kale said a number. The room did not react immediately. Numbers rarely land on first contact. They require a second or two to convert from sound into meaning. But when the conversion finished, it moved through the mess hall the way a wave moves through still water when a stone breaks the surface. The tables closest first, then outward, table by table, the smiles stopping in sequence rather than all at once, which was somehow worse to watch than if they had all stopped together. Kale picked his tray back up. He did not look around the room to see who had stopped smiling. He was not aware in any way legible on his face that he had said anything unusual. He finished his meal. Commandant Vey stood. "Cadet Osric's file is not classified, but it is restricted to instructional access," he said, in the precise neutrality that the tactics faculty were trained to maintain in front of a class. A register that gave away nothing about what was coming, though he had, in fact, already decided what was coming 3 weeks earlier. "I think, given the direction this conversation has taken itself, this is as good a moment as any to make an exception." He did not phrase it as a punishment. He phrased it as an opportunity, and the class, not yet understanding what they were being offered, filed into the auxiliary briefing room 40 minutes later expecting a lecture. What Vey showed them was not dramatic in the way academy training simulations were dramatic, with their clean telemetry and modeled outcomes. It was documentary footage, degraded, partial, salvaged from a Raider wreck's own recovered black box archive, because the Raiders had been recording their own engagements for after-action review, and had lost enough ships that a compact patrol eventually collected the wreckage. It was ugly and unscored, and shot from angles no training simulation would ever choose. The first case study was a night engagement at an outlying mining platform. 11 colonists against a Raider boarding party 3 times their number, the platform's structural integrity already failing. And a decision, visible in the recovered comms log, time-stamped. Unmistakably, a 16-year-old's voice giving orders that did not sound like a 16-year-old's voice. To vent an entire section to space rather than lose the platform's reactor core. 11 colonists survived. The section reflooded 4 hours later, after the boarding party had frozen or been ejected with it. The second was a supply convoy, ambushed, and a rerouting order given in real time that cost the colony 2 transports and saved 11. The third was an evacuation. The fourth a stand at a choke point that held for 6 hours against numbers the tactics faculty, watching, visibly recalculated in real time. And the fifth was quieter than the rest. A decision not to engage. A convoy allowed to pass unmolested because the math, done by a boy with no formal training and no one to check his work, said that fighting would cost more than it saved. By the 8th case study, Viral Kess was not smiling. She was watching with the expression of someone doing a calculation that was going to take longer than the briefing period had left to finish. Around her, the room had gone silent in the particular way rooms go silent when they are recalculating not just one person's file, but the assumptions that had let them misread it in the first place. Cale did not speak during any of it. He watched the footage with the rest of the room, his expression unchanged from the one he had worn in the mess hall, in orientation in every session since not blank but simply his, an expression that had never taken its cues from what was happening around him, only from what he was thinking, and no one in the room could have said, watching him now, what that was. The briefing ended without further commentary. Vey closed the file. Cadets filed out in a silence that had a different texture than the silence they'd filed in with heavier and aimed inward rather than at each other. Viral Kess stopped at the door. She did not look back at the room, only at Cale, briefly, in the manner of someone confirming a data point rather than delivering an apology. The incident log number and the total were different by more than 30, she said. I asked for one number. You gave me the wrong one on purpose. You asked which one I wanted to give you, Cale said. I answered the question you actually asked. She held that for a moment, not offended, recalibrating, the way the file had described her rank as earned rather than granted, and an earned rank updates when the evidence changes. Then she left without further comment and did not raise the subject again for the rest of the term, in the mess hall or anywhere else. Cale gathered his materials. On the way out, he stopped at the equipment rack by the door, where the day's practical component gear had been left after the morning session, and picked up the one item on the rack that had come with him from Ashford Reach rather than the Institute's supply. A service-worn blade with no ornamentation, its edge kept sharp out of habit rather than need. The same knife the admissions board had not known, which regulation would let them confiscate. He clipped it back to his belt and walked out into the corridor without a word to anyone still standing there watching him go. Vey found him an hour later in the training hall, alone, running the same footwork drill from that morning session for what looked like the 5th or 6th consecutive time. You could have let the file speak for itself sooner, Vey said. You've had it available to you since your first review. It wasn't relevant before today, Cale said. It's going to keep being relevant. That's not a door that closes once it's opened. Cale considered that. Then I'll deal with it when it's relevant again. Vey almost smiled at that, an expression he did not, in the end, let land on his face, because it would have given away more than the moment required. He had read the file 3 times before term started, and had spent every week since then waiting for the room to catch up to what he already knew. Now it had, and the boy in front of him seemed entirely uninterested in what that meant for how the room saw him, only in what the drill in front of him was going to require tomorrow. Since the 2nd week, Vey said, I've been waiting for the right topic to come up in a room full of people. I didn't engineer today, I just made sure the file was ready when it did. I know, Cale said, it was not an accusation. It was, as far as Vey could tell, simple recognition of a fact, filed away with the same lack of ceremony as everything else the boy seemed to process. Vey nodded once and left him to the drill. That evening, in the 2nd-year cohort's performance record, the running assessment file that every instructor at Threnody contributed to across a cadet's full 6 years. The document that alumni said mattered more than any single exam, because it was the only one that watched a person over time rather than in a single controlled moment. Commandant Vey opened Cale Osrich's entry, considered the footage. The mess hall, the number that had stopped a room built entirely on the assumption that stopping was not something this particular cadet could do, and wrote 3 words. Now in command. Now in command.